June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach. Cinematic depictions often highlight the dramatic spectacle of landing craft ramps descending and soldiers surging onto the sandy expanse amidst a hail of machine gun fire. Yet, what the silver screen frequently omits is the agonizing anticipation. Thousands of servicemen confined within claustrophobic steel vessels, idling offshore for interminable hours, succumbing to the ravages of seasickness, meticulously observing the relentless march of time as German artillery batteries precisely calibrated their targeting on these predictable formations. This harrowing scenario, a veritable nightmare, was never meant to materialize. Its partial mitigation from an unmitigated disaster can be attributed solely to the tenacious ingenuity of a singular boat constructor from New Orleans, who had successfully resolved a conundrum that the entire United States military establishment had deemed insurmountable. Let us transport ourselves back to 1941. The American military found itself confronting a daunting arithmetical challenge. The imperative was to disembark a formidable force of 150,000 troops onto hostile coastlines, fortified by what was, at that historical juncture, the most impregnable defensive infrastructure ever conceived by humankind. Existing disembarkation methodologies were proving to be unequivocally calamitous. The British military had painfully assimilated this lesson during the Gallipoli campaign of 1915. Infantrymen attempting to reach shore in rudimentary wooden craft were mercilessly decimated before their feet could even touch the sand. By the advent of the Second World War, the majority of naval forces adhered to a fundamentally similar operational doctrine. Mammoth transport vessels would anchor a considerable distance from the shoreline, subsequently deploying smaller boats via davits. These smaller craft would then proceed, either by oar or motor, towards the beach. Troops were compelled to clamber precariously over the gunwales, plunging into water that often reached chest depth, all while burdened with weighty 60-pound packs. The inherent difficulties proliferated with alarming rapidity, akin to the reproductive cycle of rabbits. Firstly, the unforgiving laws of physics presented a formidable obstacle. A soldier endeavoring to traverse a gunwale amidst waves that relentlessly buffeted the boat against the shore faced a statistical probability of approximately 40% of sustaining a broken ankle. Secondly, the issue of exposure was critical. For a perilous 30-second interval, each soldier constituted a conspicuous, vulnerable target, starkly silhouetted against the sky. Thirdly, the logistical impediment of speed was profoundly problematic. The disembarkation of a single company, comprising roughly 120 personnel, could consume anywhere from 45 minutes to a grueling 2 hours, contingent upon prevailing surf conditions. Fourthly, and this proved to be the decisive failing, the existing methods precluded the deployment of essential vehicles, such as jeeps, artillery pieces, and tanks, the very instruments indispensable for achieving battlefield supremacy. These crucial assets remained confined to the transport ships, as there existed no viable means of maneuvering them from a boat into water 3 feet deep. The British military had devised one specific remedy: specialized landing vessels equipped with bow doors. However, these were colossal ships that necessitated beaching themselves directly onto the shore. Once grounded, they became inextricably immobilized for extended periods, rendering them exceptionally vulnerable and static targets. The Japanese naval forces had experimented with their Daihatsu-class landing craft, yet even these designs still mandated that troops leap over the sides to reach the shore. Essentially, every navy worldwide was grappling with the same fundamental challenge: how to ingeniously transform a conventional boat into an effective bridge for amphibious assaults. Now, the narrative takes a particularly intriguing turn. In September 1941, the United States Marine Corps disseminated a technical specification that, to many, read more like an excerpt from a work of science fiction than a practical military requirement. They articulated the need for a vessel capable of transporting 36 fully combat-equipped troops, striking a beach at maximum velocity, disembarking those personnel onto dry sand in less than 10 seconds, subsequently reversing its course off the beach, and returning to retrieve another contingent, all within a round-trip duration of under 15 minutes. The truly audacious stipulation was this: it had to possess a draft sufficiently shallow to navigate over treacherous coral reefs, yet simultaneously exhibit enough stability to withstand arduous open ocean transits. Oh, and one additional, seemingly minor detail: it needed to be economically viable for mass production, in the thousands, and straightforward enough in its operation that 19-year-old coxswains could competently pilot them under direct enemy fire. Every preeminent shipyard across America, upon reviewing these exacting specifications, rendered an identical verdict: impossible. The fundamental hull configurations required for both shallow draft and robust ocean stability are inherently contradictory. A bow ramp engineered with sufficient structural integrity to bear the weight of rapidly disembarking troops would inevitably be excessively ponderous. The hydraulic systems, it was predicted, would inevitably succumb to the corrosive effects of salt water. The litany of technical objections filled numerous three-ring binders. However, there was a particular individual residing in Louisiana who persistently presented himself at Navy procurement offices, brandishing a small wooden model and an unwavering grin, adamantly asserting that he had, in fact, already constructed the very vessel they deemed unfeasible. They initially dismissed him as delusional. It simply transpired that he hailed from the distinctive milieu of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson Higgins embodied precisely the archetype of individual that military bureaucrats typically abhorred: a self-taught innovator, boisterously opinionated, perpetually clad in ill-fitting suits, and possessed of the infuriating proclivity for being unequivocally correct when every credentialed academic and expert declared him mistaken. Born in Nebraska in 1886, he had dedicated 3 decades to the construction of shallow-draft vessels for oil prospectors, trappers, and even rum runners operating within the intricate labyrinth of the Louisiana bayous. While graduates of the esteemed Naval Academy meticulously designed sleek destroyers, Higgins was assiduously engaged in deciphering the mechanics of how to buoyancy a half-ton engine through 18 inches of swamp water without becoming ensnared on a submerged cypress knee. His company, Higgins Industries, remained entirely outside the purview of the military's strategic considerations until 1938. The Marine Corps had, for several years, been rigorously testing various designs for landing craft, all of which had proven to be abject failures. They had repeatedly witnessed these vessels run aground 50 yards from shore, capsize sideways in the tumultuous surf, or suffer catastrophic damage to their propellers on hidden sandbars. Then, a junior officer recalled a vague anecdote about an eccentric Cajun who crafted boats reputedly capable of running on heavy dew, as the colloquialism went. The Marines dispatched observers to New Orleans, primarily as a bureaucratic formality. Higgins, with characteristic showmanship, loaded them into his latest swamp boat, christened the Eureka, and proceeded to pilot it at full throttle directly onto a mudflat, execute a rapid maneuver akin to a sports car, and then effortlessly motor back into deeper water. The astonished observers promptly cabled Washington, "You need to see this immediately." The revolutionary essence of Higgins's design, and the very reason it drew the ire of established shipbuilders, lay in his wholesale rejection of conventional maritime principles. Standard naval architectural dogma dictated that a boat's bow should possess a sharp, acute form to efficiently cleave through water. Higgins, conversely, fashioned a bow resembling a snow shovel, flat, broad, and angled distinctly upward. Traditional wisdom further asserted the necessity of a deep keel to ensure stability. His innovative boats, however, incorporated virtually no keel whatsoever, featuring only a shallow, semi-tunnel design that provided protection for the propeller. The overall hull shape appeared incongruous, even fundamentally erroneous, to anyone formally trained in conventional marine engineering. Yet, within the unique environment of the Louisiana swamps, it functioned with an almost magical efficacy. The military's initial reaction was a potent blend of disdain and profound suspicion. Engineers from the esteemed Bureau of Ships meticulously authored extensive technical papers, eloquently explicating why the Eureka's unconventional design fundamentally contravened established hydrodynamic principles. They vigorously contended that the flat bow would inevitably generate excessive drag. They predicted that the shallow draft would render it uncontrollable in strong currents, and that the protected propeller tunnel would invariably lead to problematic cavitation issues. Higgins, undeterred, extended an invitation for them to witness demonstrations firsthand in New Orleans. They politely declined, citing budgetary constraints. The unspoken translation was clear. "We are not squandering government funds on nonsensical swamp boat experiments when reputable shipyards are actively developing proper landing craft." However, the Marine Corps persisted in their advocacy, recognizing that they were the very personnel who would ultimately bear the burden of storming hostile beaches. They grasped a crucial reality that the desk-bound admirals failed to comprehend. In April 1941, the United States Navy finally acquiesced to a series of competitive trials held in Norfolk, Virginia. For distinct shipyards presented their respective designs. 3 of these entries originated from established maritime corporations possessing impeccable, gilt-edged reputations. Higgins arrived with 3 of his boats, securely strapped to a barge. He brought no elaborate blueprints, only the tangible hardware itself. The official evaluation criteria encompass seaworthiness, speed, maneuverability, durability, and, crucially, the paramount ability to extricate itself from a beach. The results were unequivocally decisive. Higgins's boats struck the beach at an impressive 9 knots, rode smoothly onto the sand, reversed off the shore in under 30 seconds, and repeated this arduous sequence 20 times without fouling the propeller or sustaining any damage to the hull. The competition fared dismally. One competitor's boat became irrevocably buried at the bow and proved utterly unmovable. Another's propeller catastrophically shattered upon its inaugural grounding. The third managed a single successful beaching and retraction before beginning to take on water. By the second day of trials, Navy observers were discreetly revising procurement protocols. By the third day, Higgins had secured a substantial contract for 1,500 boats, and remarkably, he had not yet even unveiled his truly audacious concept. The Eureka boat effectively resolved half of the complex problem: the efficient transit to the beach and subsequent retraction. However, troops were still compelled to clamber precariously over the sides, and there remained absolutely no practical method for driving a jeep directly out of the vessel. Higgins was acutely aware of this limitation. He had been meticulously sketching potential solutions in the margins of napkins for 2 years, but every design consistently encountered the same insurmountable hurdle: the immutable laws of physics. Incorporating a ramp at the bow necessitated the inclusion of hinges, and hinges, in turn, created an inherent weak point precisely where the boat experienced maximum flex. The forces involved were utterly absurd. One must envision a steel plate, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long, supporting 6 men, each weighing 250 pounds with full gear, all while the boat pitched violently in 3-foot swells. This translated to a staggering 1,500 pounds of dynamic load bouncing on a hinge every 2 seconds. Engineers rigorously calculated that such an immense stress load would inevitably snap any hinge mechanism within a mere week of continuous saltwater operations. Then, in late 1941, a Marine Corps officer named Victor Krulak presented Higgins with a single photograph that irrevocably altered the trajectory of the entire endeavor. Krulak had served as an observer in Shanghai in 1937, where he had witnessed the Japanese assault Chinese positions along the Yangtze River. The photograph depicted a Japanese Daihatsu landing craft featuring a ramp positioned at the bow, not over the sides, a true ramp. Higgins reportedly scrutinized that image for perhaps 10 seconds, then allegedly uttered an unprintable expletive, remarking that while the Japanese had grasped the fundamental concept, their execution was flawed, because their ramp still forced troops to wade through ankle-deep water. It was at this pivotal juncture that Higgins's extensive experience with swamp boats propelled his innovative thinking into overdrive. The Japanese design deployed a ramp that angled directly down into the water. This was perfectly adequate for the placid conditions of calm rivers, but utterly useless in tumultuous surf zones where every incoming wave could instantaneously alter the water depth by 2 feet. Higgins realized that the ramp could not merely drop. It had to execute a dual motion, dropping downward and simultaneously extending the hull forward, thereby creating an unbroken bridge from the boat's deck directly to the dry beach. The underlying geometry sounds deceptively simple until one is actually confronted with the complexities of its physical construction. The ramp itself needed to conform precisely to the same angle as the bow, which in its design was a precise 45 degrees. When in its raised position, it seamlessly became the bow itself, functioning as a watertight continuation of the hull. When lowered, it had to lock into place, becoming flat and stable enough to permit a 5,000-pound Jeep to drive across at its speed without exhibiting more than half an inch of flex. Transcending a mere half-inch measurement, Andrew Higgins's engineering solution for the critical ramp mechanism was characterized by an uncompromising mechanical robustness. It employed a formidable system of 2 potent hydraulic cylinders, exerting force against resilient steel cables, further supplemented by manual chains to ensure operational continuity should the primary hydraulic system falter. The ramp itself, constructed from quarter-inch steel plate and rigorously reinforced with I-beams meticulously welded to its underside, possessed substantial heft. This extraordinary weight, far from being a drawback, proved advantageous. Upon its forceful descent onto sandy terrain, the sheer momentum and mass anchored it firmly in place. The hinge assemblies, deliberately eschewing fragile fulcrums, were instead colossal cylindrical pivots, each an impressive 4 inches in diameter, components more akin to those found in heavy-duty drawbridges. While acknowledging their potential for failure, Higgins ensured they would endure for the critical duration of an assault. Furthermore, the entire mechanism was ingeniously conceived to allow a crew to effectuate repairs on a damaged hinge within a mere 20 minutes, utilizing only a sledgehammer and a cheater bar for leverage. The inaugural prototype of this revolutionary vessel was completed and ready for assessment by May 1942. Higgins himself christened it the LCVP, an acronym for Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel. However, the military quickly adopted the colloquial designation, Higgins Boat, a name Andrew intensely disliked, preferring that recognition be bestowed upon his dedicated team of engineers. The United States Marine Corps subsequently transported the craft to Solomon's Island, Maryland, for rigorous testing. An elite evaluation squad proceeded to fill its hull with a complete platoon of infantrymen alongside a jeep, an unprecedented feat for any amphibious vessel globally. They then skillfully navigated the craft towards a designated shoreline and observed its performance. The bow ramp descended swiftly, allowing the jeep to disembark in a mere 4 seconds, followed by the troops in an additional 6 seconds. The ramp then retracted, and the vessel reversed efficiently into deeper waters. This entire sequence, from initial grounding to full withdrawal, astonishingly took just 13 seconds. The presiding officer overseeing the test immediately transmitted a report back to Washington declaring, "Operational parameters conclusively fulfilled. Strongly endorsed the swift commencement of large-scale manufacturing." Within 3 weeks, Higgins Industries secured a substantial contract for 10,000 units. Despite this, the Pentagon still harbored reservations, anticipating potential design failures in actual combat, yet they were sufficiently compelled by dire circumstances to take a calculated risk. Years after the cessation of hostilities, Dwight D. Eisenhower articulated a statement that merits immortalization in stone. "Andrew Higgins is the pivotal individual responsible for our victory. If Higgins had not designed and constructed those indispensable landing crafts, we would have been utterly incapable of conducting an assault across an unfortified coastline. Indeed, the entire strategic blueprint of the conflict would have undergone a fundamental transformation. Emanating from such a distinguished 5-star general, the very architect of the most monumental amphibious assault ever recorded in human history, this declaration transcends mere hyperbole. It stands, rather, as an unvarnished acknowledgment of critical dependence, a profound confession of the pivotal role played by one man's ingenuity. However, a closer examination of the precise statistical data reveals a reality that somehow surpasses even the most embellished narrative in its sheer improbability. August 7, 1942, marked the inaugural significant trial of the Higgins boat under authentic combat conditions at Guadalcanal. The 1st Marine Division was tasked with disembarking a formidable force of 11,000 personnel onto beaches fiercely guarded by a contingent of 2,800 Japanese combatants, who had meticulously fortified their positions over several months. Conventional pre-conflict military theory posited that such an extensive operation would necessitate a duration ranging from 14 to 18 hours to successfully get all troops and their essential equipment ashore. Yet, the observed operational period was a mere 4 hours and 17 minutes, spanning from the initial amphibious assault craft making landfall to the final rifle company establishing defensive positions. Marine logistics officers, astonished by this unprecedented speed, initially suspected their timing devices were malfunctioning. They immediately transmitted urgent communications to the offshore transport vessels, querying, "Verification of personnel tallies. Such rapidity is implausible." The transports unequivocally confirmed the figures. Every individual soldier accounted for, in addition to 73 vehicles, which, according to established tactical doctrine, were considered impossible to deploy on the initial day of operations. This extraordinary performance was attributable to an ingenious operational efficiency, a true mechanical magic. A solitary Higgins boat possessed the capability to complete a full shoreline to mothership transit, the complete operational sequence encompassing beaching, disembarkation, stern-first withdrawal, return navigation, and subsequent replenishment, within a remarkably swift 11 to 15 minutes, contingent upon the distance involved. In stark contrast, British landing craft deployed at Dieppe merely 3 weeks later exhibited an average operational duration of 32 minutes for each complete cycle and, critically, often proved incapable of self-extrication from the beach, resulting in numerous personnel being marooned as the tide receded. At Guadalcanal, The Marines commanded a formidable contingent of 87 Higgins boats comprising the initial assault echelon. Through straightforward calculation, multiplying 87 boats by 4 potential trips per hour yields a phenomenal 348 boat loads successfully delivered within each 60-minute interval. Given that each individual craft was capable of transporting either 36 infantry personnel or a single vehicle accompanied by its crew, performing this calculation reveals an astonishing throughput exceeding 12,000 personnel equivalent movements per hour. Evidently, the primary limiting factor did not reside within the vessels themselves, but rather in the rapidity of their replenishment from the transport ships. November 1943 brought the Crucible of Tarawa, an engagement where the previously lauded 3-minute operational claim faced scrutiny under exceptionally arduous circumstances. The Navy's nautical charts proved catastrophically inaccurate. The tidal level registered 18 inches below its forecasted height, and a formidable coral barrier stretched outwards for 500 yards from the coastline. Consequently, more substantial amphibious vessels became irrevocably beached, rendered immobile and vulnerable. Yet, the ubiquitous Higgins boats, possessing an incredibly shallow draft of merely 3 feet, effortlessly traversed the coral barrier as if it presented no obstruction whatsoever. In relentless succession, with an interval of every 3 to 4 minutes, another craft made landfall upon Red Beach. The Japanese defenders had meticulously pre-calibrated their machine guns and mortars to target the waterline, anticipating the approach of ponderous, easily trackable targets. Instead, they encountered an unceasing procession, akin to an unstoppable conveyor belt. The Marines endured appalling losses, with over 1,000 fatalities recorded within a harrowing 76-hour period. Nevertheless, they maintained their relentless advance, sustained by the unwavering operational tempo of the landing crafts. Japanese Commander Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki had confidently declared that the subjugation of Tarawa would demand the deployment of 1,000,000 men. Over the course of a century, the Marines, however, achieved victory in a mere 3 days, principally due to the Higgins boats' ability to deliver reinforcements with a rapidity that outpaced the defenders' capacity to neutralize the assault force. In July 1943, Operation Husky, a monumental undertaking, necessitated the deployment of 2,590 assorted landing craft, executing simultaneous landings across 26 distinct beachheads in Sicily. Higgins boats constituted approximately 1,400 units of that overall complement. The rhythm of operations was executed with precision comparable to a surgical procedure. These resilient vessels made landfall, disembarked their cargo, retracted, and subsequently returned with such seamless and predictable cadence that onshore command personnel meticulously orchestrated the arrival intervals, much like experienced air traffic controllers managing flight patterns. Certain individual craft completed an astonishing 14 round trips within the initial 12-hour operational window. The dedicated crews toiled beyond the point of physical exhaustion, navigating purely by ingrained instinct and executing loading procedures through practiced muscle memory. When Navy analysts synthesized post-operational assessments, they discovered that an average Higgins boat deployed during the Sicily campaign transported an impressive 468 troops or 23 vehicles across 3 uninterrupted days of operations. Extrapolating this performance across the fleet of 1,400 vessels elucidates precisely why German forces proved incapable of reinforcing their positions with sufficient rapidity to mount an effective counteroffensive. The climactic moment arrived with the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. More than 1,500 Higgins boats comprised the vanguard of the assault waves across 5 designated beach sectors. Utah Beach recorded an astonishing frequency of craft arrivals, with a vessel making landfall approximately every 3.2 minutes during the intense peak hours of the invasion. The situation at Omaha Beach, however, devolved into unmitigated pandemonium, as the German defensive fortifications proved significantly more formidable than anticipated by Allied intelligence assessments. Yet, even amid such ferocious opposition, the relentless procession of landing crafts remained unbroken. It was this unwavering deluge, rather than individual acts of valor alone, that ultimately shattered the German defensive lines. It was the sheer, overwhelming volume of incoming forces. While one might conceivably repel the initial assault echelon, or even the second, what hope could there be against the 8th wave, or the 15th? The tireless operation of these invaluable vessels rendered such sustained endurance an achievable reality, ensuring the continuous arrival of troops and equipment. Curiously, the Japanese military possessed visual documentation and operational experience with their own Daihatsu landing craft, a vessel that had, in fact, originated the fundamental concept of the bow ramp as early as the 1930s. This raised a profound question: what factors prevented them from developing a vessel of comparable efficacy to the Higgins boat? This perplexing query consistently preoccupied Allied intelligence analysts throughout the Pacific Campaign, as each time U.S. forces captured a Japanese-held island, they invariably discovered landing craft that nearly functioned as intended but ultimately proved deficient in crucial operational aspects. The ensuing investigation into this discrepancy unveils a compelling insight into the profound influence of engineering philosophy upon the trajectory of military conflicts. The Daihatsu-class landing craft, initially introduced into service in 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War, bore a superficial resemblance to the Higgins design, featuring a bow ramp, shallow draft, and the purported ability to beach and retract. However, Japanese engineers had engineered their vessel for an entirely disparate set of environmental parameters. Their operational focus centered primarily on riverine environments and tranquil coastal zones within China and Southeast Asia, locales where one could accurately forecast tidal movements, conduct prior reconnaissance of landing zones, and function within comparatively sheltered aquatic environments. Consequently, the Daihatsu incorporated a more pronounced V-shaped hull configuration, designed to maximize efficiency in placid waters. While exhibiting superior speed under optimal conditions, this design performed catastrophically in heavy surf. When incoming waves impacted the V-hull at an oblique angle, the boat would invariably veer uncontrollably to the side, occasionally resulting in complete capsizing. The design of the ramp mechanism eloquently illustrates this fundamental divergence in engineering philosophy. Japanese designers opted for a comparatively lightweight ramp, which descended sharply into the water. While entirely suitable for disembarkation onto a riverbank characterized by a mere 6 inches of water depth, this design proved disastrous when faced with a coastline experiencing 2-foot surf. Assault troops were still compelled to disembark and wade through often knee-deep water, thereby sacrificing crucial speed, forfeiting the element of surprise, and exposing themselves directly to enemy fire. Following their capture of Daihatsu craft at Guadalcanal, the Marines subsequently subjected them to rigorous evaluation. The resulting appraisal was unequivocally harsh, concluding, "Ramp does not extend hull line. Vehicle operation impossible in surf conditions. Extraction from beach inconsistent due to underpowered engines and hull design." Herein lay the more profound conceptual error. The Japanese never fully grasped that the seemingly unrefined, blunt bow of the Higgins craft was not merely a design compromise, but rather its most fundamental and intentional feature. This distinctive, broad, and flattened bow profile, akin to a snow shovel, permitted the boat to ascend the beach at considerable velocity, leveraging its inherent momentum to surmount the sandy incline until the ramp could be deployed directly onto solid, dry terrain. In contrast, the Daihatsu's more acutely angled bow would invariably dig deeply into the sand and become firmly lodged. Japanese crews endeavored to mitigate this flaw by executing slower approaches, an unfortunate tactic that merely afforded enemy defenders additional crucial moments for targeting and engagement. At Tarawa, U.S. forces discovered numerous abandoned Daihatsu craft that had indeed successfully made landfall, yet proved utterly incapable of disengaging in reverse. Their propellers had either struck submerged coral formations or their hulls had become too deeply embedded in the sand, effectively transforming these vital transport assets into static, vulnerable bunkers. The Imperial Japanese Navy did, in due course, attempt to directly emulate the successful Higgins boat design. In 1944, Japanese engineers meticulously scrutinized captured LCVPs recovered from the Philippines, and subsequently developed detailed specifications for a domestically manufactured variant. However, by this juncture, Japan's national industrial infrastructure was in precipitous decline. While they possessed the blueprints, they found themselves devoid of the requisite manufacturing infrastructure to mass-produce intricate hydraulic systems. More critically still, they lacked the necessary skilled and semi-skilled shipyard labor force. Higgins Industries, in contrast, utilized a workforce predominantly composed of semi-skilled laborers, who could be trained to proficiently weld hull sections within weeks, rather than the years typically required by traditional methods. Japan's deeply ingrained shipbuilding culture, however, was predicated upon the expertise of master craftsmen, a methodology that inherently fails to scale effectively when faced with an immediate demand for thousands of vessels. The exigency of war demanded an immediate and overwhelming deployment of countless vessels. A poignant Japanese naval assessment from late 1944, penned by an engineering officer, offered a somber reflection. He observed that American landing craft, while perhaps lacking in aesthetic refinement, exhibited a crude but effective design philosophy, prioritizing mass production capabilities and robust performance in turbulent waters over mere elegance. He further noted the remarkable ease with which these U.S. vessels could be crewed by inexperienced personnel, attributing this to their simplified controls and a forgiving hull design that accommodated operator errors. In stark contrast, Japanese landing craft necessitated the expertise of highly skilled coxswains for proper navigation. The officer's concluding remarks underscored a profound strategic divergence. Japan had fixated on individual quality, whereas the Americans had grasped that victory would ultimately hinge on sheer quantity. This fundamental philosophical chasm, he lamented, was irreversible, even through direct imitation of hull shapes. By 1945, Japanese forces in the Pacific continued to rely on Daihatsu craft, which compelled troops to disembark directly into the water, while every American amphibious assault had evolved into a textbook demonstration of mechanized operational efficiency. Ironically, the Japanese had pioneered the bow ramp concept, but had never fully realized its transformative potential. Higgins, however, appropriated this ingenious idea, comprehended its profound implications, and subsequently re-engineered it from foundational principles. This was not mere replication. It was a clear demonstration of evolutionary advancement. August 7, 1942, marked a pivotal moment at Guadalcanal, where theoretical assumptions were about to collide head-on with the harsh realities of coral reefs, relentless Japanese machine gun fire, and the kind of chaotic pandemonium that rendered engineering textbooks quaintly optimistic. The Higgins boat had previously excelled during calm water trials conducted at Norfolk and Solomon's Island, yet these were meticulously controlled environments, featuring pre-surveyed beaches and an absence of hostile engagement. Now, a formidable flotilla of 87 such vessels was bearing down on Lunga Point, carrying the 1st Marine Division, and the durability of their design under the crucible of actual combat stress remained entirely untested. The initial challenge presented itself in the form of an extensive reef. Although pre-invasion reconnaissance had detected its presence, intelligence reports had significantly underestimated both its expansive reach and the dangerously shallow depths it created. Larger landing ships, specifically LSTs, landing ship, tank, which were engineered for transporting armored vehicles, became irrevocably grounded a considerable 400 yards from the shoreline. Their ramps descended into approximately 4 feet of water, a depth that rendered the disembarkation of tanks impossible without the catastrophic drowning of their engines. The Higgins boats, however, with their shallower draft of merely 3 feet when fully loaded, skillfully glided over the reef, often with mere inches to spare. Coxswains recounted the unnerving sensation of their hulls grating against the coral, describing a sickening, grinding sound, yet the vessels steadfastly maintained their forward momentum. Higgins had prudently over-engineered the hull bottom, incorporating double-riveted seams and reinforced keel guards, specifically anticipating that these boats would inevitably collide with submerged obstacles. This meticulously paranoid design philosophy proved instrumental in salvaging the initial phase of the landing within the first critical 30 minutes. The second formidable challenge arose from the idiosyncratic composition of the beach itself. The sand at Lunga Point was not the firm, compacted variety found on controlled test ranges. Instead, it was a loose, volcanic material that readily yielded under significant weight. When the vanguard of boats struck the shore at full velocity, their bows unexpectedly dug in far deeper than projected. Some vessels became embedded as much as 18 inches before their forward momentum was completely arrested. Panic initially gripped the crews, who feared they were permanently stuck. However, at this crucial juncture, the ramp hydraulics engaged. The substantial weight of the descending ramp paradoxically assisted in leveling the boat, effectively redistributing its mass. As troops swiftly disembarked, the vessel's weight diminished, enabling coxswains to engage the engines in reverse. Most boats successfully extricated themselves in under 40 seconds. A few required subsequent attempts, backing off at a slight angle to break the powerful suction created by the soft sand. One boat commander later recounted how he had reversed, repositioned, and grounded his vessel 3 additional times to unload successive waves of troops. Remarkably, the hull endured this relentless abuse without exhibiting any structural compromise. The third harrowing obstacle was the relentless enemy fire. It was in this brutal context that the inherent mechanical simplicity of the Higgins boat paid dividends in ways entirely unforeseen. Japanese defenders precisely targeted the incoming boats, with a barrage of mortars and machine guns. Bullets easily perforated the plywood gunwales, as Higgins had utilized plywood for the sides to minimize weight, reserving steel only for the ramp and the critical hull bottom. Troops instinctively crouched behind the substantial steel ramp for protection, a tactic that proved effective because its quarter-inch steel construction was robust enough to repel rifle rounds. However, the truly critical aspect emerged when hydraulic lines were severed by shrapnel, an occurrence that afflicted 11 boats in the initial wave. In such instances, crews seamlessly transitioned to manual chains, with 2 men strenuously cranking handles, while the ramp's descent now took 18 seconds. Instead of the customary 6, it nevertheless descended. This ingenious redundancy, A primary hydraulic system complemented by a manual backup ensured that even damaged boats remained fully operational. The fourth significant challenge revolved around sustainment. Over the ensuing 3 arduous days, those 87 boats operated continuously, without cessation. There were no dedicated maintenance facilities, no readily available replacement parts, only the crews themselves, performing rudimentary field repairs between runs. They ingeniously resorted to using seawater as a coolant when their freshwater supplies were depleted. Bullet holes were expediently patched with tar and canvas. One particular boat suffered the complete loss of its hydraulic system when a mortar fragment obliterated the pump, yet its resilient crew operated it manually for 2 full days, completing an astonishing 23 trips until a repair ship finally arrived. Higgins had deliberately engineered every major component to be replaceable using only basic hand tools and sheer brute force. If a propeller sustained damage, crews carried a spare and could swap it out in a mere 20 minutes. Should a ramp hinge crack, they simply bolted on a backup plate and continued their vital operations. The comprehensive after-action reports from Guadalcanal ultimately filled 3 substantial binders. Navy maintenance teams meticulously inspected every boat following the conclusion of the first week of operations. Their findings included stress fractures, worn bearings, and corroded fittings, but notably, not a single catastrophic structural failure was recorded. The average boat had been grounded an astonishing 31 times, sustained multiple hits from enemy fire, and operated continuously in saltwater conditions without formal maintenance, yet still maintained an impressive 87% mission capability. Engineers had initially projected a grim 40% failure rate within the first 48 hours of combat operations. The actual failure rate, however, was a mere 9%. And the majority of these instances involved boats that had sustained direct hits from heavy artillery. Guadalcanal did not merely validate the efficacy of the Higgins boat, it unequivocally demonstrated that an unglamorous, overbuilt, and inherently idiot-proof design philosophy decisively triumphs over elegant engineering when human lives are at stake. The story of Higgins Industries then takes an astonishing, almost fantastical turn. In December 1941, Higgins Industries was a modest regional boat shop, employing a mere 75 individuals and constructing perhaps a dozen vessels monthly. By December 1944, it had metamorphosed into the preeminent private employer in Louisiana, boasting a workforce exceeding 20,000, operating 7 sprawling plants that collectively spanned 30 city blocks, and delivering an incredible 700 boats each month. This was not merely scaling production, it was an act of industrial sorcery. Andrew Higgins achieved this monumental feat by systematically flouting virtually every manufacturing tenet that the government adamantly insisted was sacrosanct. The military's procurement office harbored very specific, entrenched notions regarding shipbuilding practices. One must employ highly trained shipwrights who had dedicated years to mastering their craft. Boats should be constructed individually, from inception to completion, with the same dedicated crew overseeing each vessel's entire build, and rigorous quality control measures, with inspectors signing off at every stage, must be strictly maintained. Higgins, confronting this traditional model, essentially retorted, "That's charming, but we required 20,000 boats in 3 years. So observe this." He ingeniously adopted a manufacturing innovation pioneered by Henry Ford, a technique that the conservative maritime industry considered nothing short of heresy: the assembly line production method. Boats simply do not traverse factories, traditional shipbuilders vehemently insisted. Higgins, undeterred, made the move regardless. He meticulously segmented the LCVP's construction into 14 major subassemblies. Station 1 was dedicated to fabricating the bow ramp and its intricate hydraulic system. Station 2 focused on constructing various hull sections. Station 3 handled the installation of engines and drive systems. Workers became highly specialized in a single, repetitive task, whether it was welding a particular seam, riveting a specific joint, or wiring a distinct electrical system. A young individual from rural Louisiana, who might never have even glimpsed the ocean, could be trained to weld a flawless hull seam in a mere 2 weeks. The traditionalists vociferously protested that this radical approach would inevitably yield inferior boats. Higgins's decisive response was to extend an open invitation to Navy inspectors, encouraging them to rigorously test random boats directly off the production line. The recorded failure rate was an astonishingly low 2.1%, a performance superior to that of traditional shipyards producing bespoke vessels with master craftsmen. The workforce itself became a revolutionary entity. Higgins demonstrated an unprecedented inclusivity, hiring anyone capable of wielding tools: women, black workers, elderly men who had surpassed draft age, and even teenagers on summer break. In the societal context of 1940s New Orleans, this was an exceptionally radical approach. The company pioneered factory integration years before the military itself integrated its units. Black and white workers shared the same assembly lines, dined together in the same cafeterias, and utilized the same bathroom facilities. Higgins's rationale was rooted in pure, unadulterated pragmatism. "I couldn't care less if they're purple with pink polka dots. Can they weld?" However, the societal impact of his policies was profoundly significant. By 1943, an impressive 18% of his workforce was black, and 40% were women. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter was not merely a propaganda poster in New Orleans. She was a tangible, vital presence, actively constructing the very boats that would ultimately secure victory in the war. The production tempo at Higgins Industries was relentless and unyielding. In June 1944, the pivotal month of D-Day, Higgins Industries achieved an astounding delivery of 737 landing craft. This translates to an average of 24 boats per day, or one complete boat every 60 minutes, with operations running 3 shifts around the clock. The sprawling plants never ceased their activity. Welding arcs illuminated the night sky, creating a continuous, almost supernatural lightning storm. Workers routinely clocked 60-hour weeks as standard, with 80-hour weeks becoming commonplace in the lead-up to major invasions. The company paid premium wages, an impressive $1.20 per hour when the national average hovered around 65 cents, because Higgins intuitively understood that exhausted and financially strained workers would inevitably produce substandard boats. Conversely, well-compensated and highly motivated workers could consistently maintain exceptional quality while simultaneously achieving seemingly impossible production quotas. Raw materials, rather than labor, eventually emerged as the primary bottleneck in this industrial marvel. A single LCVP necessitated 1.2 tons of steel plate, 80 feet of hydraulic line, 340 rivets, 15 gallons of marine paint, and one powerful 225 horsepower gray marine diesel engine. Multiplying these requirements by 700 boats monthly revealed a staggering demand for 840 tons of steel, 56,000 feet of hydraulics, and 238,000 rivets every single month, all of which had to arrive punctually and without exception. Higgins shrewdly established direct relationships with major steel mills in Pittsburgh, rubber plants in Akron, and engine manufacturers in Detroit. He audaciously circumvented military logistics channels entirely, when procurement officers proved too sluggish, sometimes even purchasing materials on the private market at a higher cost simply to uphold his stringent delivery schedules. The Pentagon initially disdained this unconventional, cowboy approach until they inevitably recognized that the boats consistently materialized exactly as promised, precisely as stipulated. By the cessation of hostilities, Higgins Industries had achieved a remarkable production tally of 20,094 vessels. This impressive fleet encompassed not only the ubiquitous LCVPs, but also considerably larger LCMs, swift PT boats, and various other specialized naval craft. This output surpassed the combined manufacturing efforts of all other American boat builders, positioning the company as the primary supplier, responsible for an astonishing 92% of the Navy's total landing craft contingent. However, the fortunes of the company dramatically reversed with the capitulation of Japan in August 1945, which instantly led to the cancellation of outstanding orders for an additional 12,000 boats. Consequently, within a mere 6-month period, the company's robust workforce plummeted from a peak of 20,000 employees to a mere 800 individuals. This rapid contraction saw the industrial empire, which had expanded with such astonishing speed, collapse with equal velocity. Nevertheless, the indelible mark left by those 20,000 vessels had already fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of military history. At Omaha Beach, precisely at 6:30 hours on June 6, 1944, unfolded what would become the most renowned 6 hours in the annals of amphibious warfare. Throughout this pivotal engagement, Higgins' boats served as the critical connective tissue, orchestrating the entire invasion effort. When one observes the archival, often grainy, cinematographic records or the meticulously crafted Hollywood dramatizations, one witnesses the culmination of a colossal undertaking, the sophisticated evolution of their design, the unparalleled miracle of their mass production, and their rigorous combat validation. Yet, beyond these immediate observations, one is also viewing the foundational blueprint that every subsequent amphibious assault, spanning the next 8 decades, would rigorously adhere to, extending even to contemporary operations. The sheer statistical magnitude emanating from the Normandy landings is truly staggering, a reality that only fully resonates when one deliberately pauses to contemplate the intricate logistical demands. The initial waves of the assault alone deployed 1,089 Higgins boats across the 5 designated landing sectors. At Omaha Beach in isolation, a remarkable 293 LCVPs executed the perilous journey from the transport ships to the embattled shoreline. Each individual boat, on average, completed 4.7 cycles of disembarkation and return within the critical first 12 hours. This translates to an astounding 1,377 distinct beach landings at a single location in merely half a day. To fully grasp this operational intensity, one must envision a boat making landfall, offloading its precious cargo, and then disengaging from the beach every 31 seconds during the peak periods of activity. The German defenders were not merely contending with waves of advancing soldiers. They were confronting a relentless mechanical system meticulously engineered to overwhelm them through sheer, unceasing repetition. Even when these invaluable boats sustained direct ordnance strikes, with 34 being obliterated at Omaha by a combination of submerged obstacles, hidden mines, and concentrated artillery fire, the continuous flow of reinforcements and supplies barely faltered, as replacement craft consistently arrived to maintain the momentum. The tactical doctrine that was forged in the crucible of Normandy subsequently achieved almost scriptural status. Contemporary amphibious operations continue to meticulously adhere to the fundamental Higgins template: successive waves of landing craft, precisely timed intervals between deployments, an uninterrupted flow of resupply, and the direct delivery of vehicles onto contested beaches. The United States Marine Corps' current landing craft air cushion, LCC, those futuristic hovercraft that appear to have sprung from the pages of science fiction, perform their operational functions in a manner fundamentally identical to the original LCVP. While undeniably faster and technologically more sophisticated, their core mission remains unchanged: to expeditiously transport troops and essential vehicles from ship to shore, and then to promptly withdraw and repeat the process. Even the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy reportedly scrutinized historical Normandy footage during the conceptualization and design phase of their Type 726 landing craft, intended for potential operations targeting Taiwan. The underlying geometric principles have demonstrably endured: a protected approach, a deployable bow ramp, and the capacity for rapid egress. However, amidst the widespread commemorations of D-Day, a crucial aspect often recedes from collective memory. The profound influence of the Higgins boat extended far beyond the European theater of conflict. In the vast expanses of the Pacific, the arduous island-hopping campaign essentially functioned as a colossal Higgins boat conveyor belt, stretching across an immense 5,000-mile expanse. Iconic battles such as Guadalcanal, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa each critically depended on these shallow-draft workhorses, which possessed the unique ability to navigate treacherous coral reefs that would have rendered conventional landing ships entirely immobile. During the ferocious Battle of Iwo Jima in February 1945, Marines successfully landed an impressive 30,000 troops within the initial 48 hours, utilizing 482 Higgins boats operating on beaches composed of volcanic ash so unconsolidated that vehicles frequently sank to their axles. The boats, and more importantly, their crews, adapted with remarkable ingenuity. Coxswains quickly learned to approach the beach at significantly higher velocities, leveraging sheer momentum to propel the craft over the most challenging sections of the loose sand. This exceptional operational flexibility, the inherent capacity to adjust techniques in response to varying environmental conditions, was a direct testament to the fundamental simplicity and robustness of the original design. Andrew Higgins passed away in 1952, merely 7 years after the conclusion of the war, largely overlooked by history and teetering on the brink of financial ruin. His company regrettably failed to successfully transition its operations to peacetime production. The lucrative military contracts, which had fueled its wartime expansion, evaporated almost overnight, and he had committed every available resource to fulfill the demanding wartime quotas, leaving no financial safety net whatsoever. The very man whom General Dwight D. Eisenhower credited with playing a pivotal role in securing victory during the war spent his twilight years embroiled in a relentless struggle against a multitude of creditors. There stands no grand Higgins memorial on the revered National Mall, nor has any majestic aircraft carrier been christened in his honor. Indeed, the vast majority of Americans have likely never encountered his name. Yet, anyone who has witnessed any cinematic depiction of beach landings, be it from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, or Iraq, has undeniably encountered his enduring legacy. Every single bow ramp that gracefully lowers onto sandy shores traces its conceptual origins back to that ingenious swamp boat builder who steadfastly convinced the Pentagon that an unpretentious and practical design definitively triumphs over one that is merely elegant yet ultimately ineffective. The contemporary United States military continues to operate landing craft that are direct descendants, both functionally and structurally, of Higgins's seminal design. The modern landing craft utility, LCU, can meticulously trace its lineage through no fewer than 7 distinct evolutionary stages, directly back to the original LCVP. When Marines conduct arduous training exercises on the beaches of Camp Pendleton or Quantico, they are meticulously executing procedures that were initially codified in 1943, based directly on the proven capabilities of the Higgins boat. The prevailing military doctrine fundamentally presupposes the ability to deliver both troops and essential vehicles directly onto contested beaches at precisely measured intervals, an audacious assumption that only became a practical reality because a single, determined engineer in New Orleans unequivocally refused to accept the prevailing notion that such an feat was simply impossible. Wars are indeed won through the formidable power of tanks, the aerial superiority of aircraft, and the unparalleled bravery of individual soldiers, but occasionally they are also decisively won by what amounts to a glorified swamp boat equipped with a ramp on its front. General Eisenhower, with his profound strategic insight, comprehended this fundamental truth. It is a realization that the rest of us should also embrace.